The rain had been falling since Portland. Not the gentle kind that makes you want to stay inside with coffee and a good book. This was the kind that came in sideways. The kind that found every gap in your jacket collar and didn't apologize for it. I had been on the road for going on 11 hours, a delayed flight out of Seattle, a missed connection in Denver, and then 3 hours on a Greyhound that smelled like someone had spilled a fast food bag and given up on cleaning it. My left knee was sending messages I didn't want to receive, and the small of my back had filed a formal complaint somewhere around hour 7. I was 67 years old and I was riding a bus to my son's house for Thanksgiving. Tell me in the comments if you've ever done something like that, if you've ever pushed your body past what it wanted to do, past what was comfortable or easy or sensible, just to sit at the same table as someone you love, just to be in the same room, just to matter to them, even for one day, because that's what I was doing. That's what I told myself I was doing. My name is Walter. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, mostly bridges and overpasses, the kind of work where the margin for error is exactly 0. I retired at 62, quietly, and the life I lived after that was quieter still. A house in Spokane that I'd paid off in 1998. A pickup truck that was 12 years old but ran perfectly because I maintained it perfectly. A savings account and a real estate trust that my late wife Margaret and I had built together over 4 decades, properties in 3 states, managed carefully, never flashy, never discussed at dinner parties. Margaret passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After that, the quiet got louder. My son Marcus lived in Sacramento with his wife Claire and their daughter Sophie, who had just turned 8. Sophie had Margaret's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that looks different depending on the light, and a laugh that could fill a room the way Margaret's used to. I drove down to see them every few months, or I tried to. The visits had gotten shorter over the past year. Claire was always busy. Marcus was always in the middle of something. Sophie would run to the door when she heard my truck, and I would hold on to that for the entire drive home. The bus pulled into Sacramento at 6:14 the evening. Marcus had offered to pick me up from the airport, but that was before the delays. I'd texted him 3 times with updates, and he'd responded once with a thumbs-up emoji. I took a rideshare from the bus station. $42. I tipped the driver well because he didn't try to make conversation, which was exactly what I needed. The house was lit up when I got there. I could hear voices inside, which surprised me. Dinner wasn't until the next day, and Marcus hadn't mentioned having company. I'd come a day early specifically to spend time with Sophie, to help set up, to feel useful. That was the word I kept coming back to in those years after Margaret. Useful. I just wanted to be useful to someone. I paid the driver, picked up my bag from the trunk, and walked up the front path. The door was unlocked. I knocked twice, then pushed it open the way I always did, calling out that I was there. Nobody answered. The voices were coming from the kitchen. I could hear Marcus clearly. His voice had always carried, and Claire's underneath his, lower and quicker. I set my bag down by the door. My knee ached on the 2 steps up into the hallway. I started toward the kitchen. That's when I heard my name. Not called out in greeting, said the way you say a name when you're talking about someone who isn't in the room. Flat. Transactional. Walter's not gonna like it, Claire said. Walter doesn't have to like it, Marcus said. He just has to sign. I stopped moving. The hallway was dim. There was a coat rack to my left and an umbrella stand. I'd bought them as a housewarming gift 6 years ago. I stood very still. And if he won't sign? Claire again. Then we use the other route. Dr. Fenwick already said he'd cooperate. 2 appointments. Document the confusion. File the petition. The trust moves to conservatorship inside of 90 days. There was a pause. The refrigerator hummed. He's not confused, Claire said, and there was something in her voice, not conscience exactly, more like someone noting a technical obstacle. He's sharp as a tack and everyone knows it. He's 67. He lives alone. He's been depressed since Mom died. That's all we need to establish a pattern. Marcus's voice was entirely calm, the voice of a man working through a project plan. We get him to a few appointments. Let Fenwick note the affect, the isolation, the age-related decline. It doesn't have to be airtight. It just has to hold long enough for the court to appoint me. And then I control the trust. The properties in Arizona and Tennessee get liquidated. We pay off the line of credit, fund the business expansion, and we're done. A pause. The sound of ice dropping into a glass. He can keep the house in Spokane. I'm not a monster. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time. I want to be careful here, because when I tell this part of the story, people sometimes ask what I felt. They want to know if I cried, or if I got angry, or if I felt the floor drop out from under me. The honest answer is that I felt nothing for about 45 seconds. Just a strange, echoing blankness, like the moment after you've struck your hand on something hard and the pain hasn't arrived yet. Then I felt everything. But I didn't move. I didn't walk into that kitchen. I didn't say a word, because I spent 31 years building things that couldn't be allowed to fall. And the first thing you learn in that work, the very first thing, is that when you discover a structural failure, you don't run in swinging a hammer. You stop. You assess. You understand the full scope of what you're dealing with before you touch a single load-bearing element. I picked up my bag from the entryway as quietly as I'd set it down. I walked back out the front door. I pulled it shut behind me. I sat on the front step in the rain for a while. Sophie's bicycle was chained to the porch railing, pink with silver streamers on the handlebars that had gotten flattened and matted over the summer. I looked at that bicycle for a long time. Then I took out my phone and called a hotel. I told them at breakfast the next morning that the rideshare had dropped me at the wrong address, and by the time I'd sorted it out, it was too late to knock. Marcus said that was strange. Claire said she hoped the hotel wasn't too uncomfortable. I said it was fine, just fine. And I asked Sophie what she was thankful for, and she said me, and her cat Biscuit, and her teacher Mrs. Orellana, in that order. And Marcus laughed, and Claire smiled, and I looked at my granddaughter's gray-green eyes, and I made her a promise that she couldn't hear. The next 8 weeks were the most focused I'd been since Margaret got sick. My attorney's name is Barbara. She has been handling my affairs for 19 years, and she is the kind of lawyer who reads contracts the way I read blueprints slowly, looking for the place where something doesn't carry the weight it claims to. I called her on the drive home from Sacramento, before I was even out of the city limits. I told her everything I'd heard, word for word. I have a good memory. It's one of the things Marcus was apparently counting on me losing. Barbara was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Walt, did anyone see you come in?" I said no. She said, "Good. Don't tell anyone else about this yet. Not one person. Can you do that?" I said I'd built load-bearing structures in earthquake zones for 3 decades. I knew how to hold still. She laughed, a short and serious laugh. "Come see me Monday." In the weeks that followed, Barbara did 3 things. First, she put my assets into a structure that would make any conservatorship petition significantly harder to execute. Not impossible, but hard enough to matter. Second, she helped me document everything. My medical records, my cognitive assessments, my financial management history. I had a physical. I had a neurological screening. I scored in the top 20% for my age bracket across every category they tested. The physician, a man named Dr. Holt, who had been my doctor since 2009, wrote a letter on his own initiative. He said he would be available to testify if necessary. Third, and most importantly, Barbara helped me rewrite my will. The original will had been drafted with Margaret, designed around the assumption that our son would be the kind of person we'd raised him to be. The new one was drafted around the facts as they currently existed. The real estate trust, the properties in Arizona and Tennessee, the 2 apartment buildings in Boise, the commercial lot in Reno went into a protected structure for Sophie's benefit, to be administered by Barbara's firm until Sophie turned 25. A significant charitable gift went to the Engineering Scholarship Fund at the University of Washington, where Margaret had gotten her degree. My house in Spokane was retained in my name until my death, after which it would be sold and the proceeds split between Sophie's trust and the scholarship fund. Marcus was not mentioned. I want to say something here, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this is the part where I should say I gave him a chance, where I should say I confronted him and he had an explanation and maybe I misunderstood. I want to be honest with you. I did think about that. I thought about it on a lot of long drives and long nights. I thought about whether I'd misheard, whether there was context I was missing, whether the man in that kitchen was having a bad night and didn't mean any of it. But Margaret used to say something I've never forgotten. She said that the most reliable version of a person is the one they show when they think no one is watching. When the performance is off, and the effort is gone, and it's just them, just their actual intentions, moving through the world. I had seen Marcus without an audience. I had heard his actual intentions. He'd used the word root and the word petition, and he'd said, "I'm not a monster," in the tone of a man reassuring himself, which is a very different thing from actually not being a monster. I did not confront him. I completed my preparations. I called him in late October to say I was looking forward to Christmas. He sounded pleased. He said Claire was going to do a standing rib roast this year. I said that sounded wonderful. I asked about Sophie and he said she'd lost her first tooth, and I said that was a big deal, and he said, yeah, it was. And for a moment he sounded like himself. The boy who used to bring home stray cats and argue passionately for their right to stay. And I held the phone and looked out the window at the empty bird feeder I kept forgetting to refill, and I felt something I'm not sure I have a word for. Not forgiveness. Something adjacent to grief, maybe. Like mourning a person who is still technically alive. Christmas was at my house that year. I had suggested it in September, and Marcus had agreed immediately, probably because it put him closer to me. Closer to what he needed from me. I had a cleaning service come through. I bought a good tree, and Sophie and I decorated it over video call, me holding up ornaments and her telling me yes or no with tremendous authority. I made up the guest room and put fresh towels in the bathroom and baked the shortbread that Margaret used to make every year, the recipe written in her handwriting on a card I kept in the kitchen drawer. On the 23rd of December, Barbara flew in from Portland. She stayed at the Marriott downtown and we had dinner together, and she told me the documents were in order. She had arranged for a courier to deliver a set of letters on the morning of the 25th. She had also, at my request, sent a copy of the documented conversations and the asset transfer records to a family law attorney she trusted, purely as a precaution. "You don't have to do this on Christmas," she said. "Not for the first time. Sophie will be there," I said. "I want her to see it. I want her to understand, when she's old enough to understand it, that someone protected her." Barbara nodded slowly. She ordered dessert. She said, "You're a good father, Walt." I said, "I was. I'm trying to be a good grandfather now." Marcus and Claire arrived on the afternoon of the 24th with Sophie wedged between two suitcases in the back seat, wearing a reindeer headband and eating a granola bar with intense focus. She ran across the front lawn and hit me at waist height and grabbed my coat with both hands, and I stood in the cold air of my own front yard and held my granddaughter and thought about bridges. About the ones I'd built that were still standing. About load distribution and redundancy and the quiet, unglamorous work of making sure that the things that mattered didn't fall. That evening was almost ordinary. Sophie helped me set the table and told me at length about a book series she was reading, something about a girl who could talk to horses, and I asked intelligent follow-up questions and she seemed pleased by this. Claire made mulled cider. Marcus sat on the couch and watched football, and I watched him watch football and thought about the version of him that existed in that kitchen in Sacramento and the version of him sitting 10 feet away from me looking tired and slightly pleased. Guilty about nothing in particular, and I wondered which one was real. And then I decided the answer was both, and that made it harder and also easier. Somehow. I went to bed before 10. My knee was better. I had taken the medication my doctor prescribed and stopped feeling like a martyr about it, which Margaret had been telling me to do for years. Christmas morning, Sophie was awake before anyone. She had the restraint to wait until 6:45, which for an 8-year-old is an act of almost heroic self-discipline. I was already dressed. I'd been awake since 5. We went downstairs together and I made hot chocolate, and she sat on the kitchen counter the way she wasn't supposed to, and I didn't say anything about it. And we watched the sky get light through the window above the sink. "Grandpa," she said. "Yeah. Are you sad?" I looked at her. She was watching me with Margaret's eyes, seriously and without any obvious agenda, the way children look at things when they actually want to know. "Sometimes," I said. "Not right now." She nodded like that was a satisfactory answer. She drank her hot chocolate. She had a small marshmallow mustache. The rest of them came down by 8. We opened gifts. Sophie got the Horsebook series, the complete set, and held each volume like it was something that required careful handling. Marcus got a cashmere sweater. Claire got a set of kitchen knives she'd mentioned once in passing 4 months ago, and the look on her face when she opened them, genuine, unguarded surprise that I'd remembered, was one of the harder moments of the morning. I had made waffles. We were finishing breakfast, the table still scattered with wrapping paper and ribbon, when the doorbell rang. I was the one who answered it, because of course I was. A young woman in a dark coat stood on the front step with a manila envelope and a professional expression. She asked if I was Walter, confirmed it, and handed me the envelope and wished me a Merry Christmas with the precise neutrality of someone who has been told not to editorialize. I thanked her and closed the door. "What is that?" Marcus asked. I came back to the table and sat down. Sophie was organizing the paper scraps by color, a project entirely of her own devising. I set the envelope on the table and I looked at my son. "I need to talk to you about some things," I said. "Both of you." Something moved across Marcus's face. Not quite recognition, not quite guilt, more like the look of a man who has been waiting for a sound and has just heard it. "Walt, it's Christmas morning," Claire started. "I know what morning it is," I said. "This won't take long. I want to tell you that I had rehearsed this." I had not. I had deliberately chosen not to rehearse it because rehearsed speeches are performances, and I had no interest in performing. I just wanted to say true things in the right order. I told them what I had heard in their kitchen in November. I was specific. I quoted the language Marcus had used, the word root, the name Dr. Fenwick, the phrase 90 days, the thing he'd said about not being a monster. I watched his face go through several stages while I spoke. Denial gathered itself and then abandoned the attempt. Something harder moved in underneath it. "You were eavesdropping," he said. "I was standing in my own son's hallway," I said. "I came in early because I wanted to help set up for Thanksgiving. Because I wanted to be useful. That's the only reason I was there." Claire had her hands flat on the table. She was not looking at Marcus. "There's a letter in that envelope for each of you from my attorney," I said. "I'd ask you to read them carefully when you have a chance. The short version is this. The trust has been restructured. The properties you were planning to liquidate are now in a protected account for Sophie's benefit. The conservatorship route you discussed has been effectively closed. I have documentation from my physician, neurological assessments, and a full financial management record for the past 4 years that your attorney is welcome to review. I'm told it would be a very difficult case to bring." Marcus stared at the envelope. "I've also spoken with a family law attorney," I said. "Not to initiate anything, just to understand what protections exist. She was very helpful." "Dad, let me finish." I had not raised my voice. I was aware of Sophie in my peripheral vision, very still now among her paper scraps, watching. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm also not going to spend what's left of my life in a courtroom. What I am going to do is be honest with you about where we stand. I looked at my son. He looked older than he had in Sacramento. Or maybe I was just seeing him differently. "I don't know when you decided I was a problem to be managed," I said. "I don't know what I did or didn't do to make you feel like the only way forward was to take from me rather than ask me. I want you to know that if you had come to me, if you had sat down and told me you were in financial trouble, that you were scared, that you needed help, I would have helped you. Without conditions, without even thinking about it very hard. Because you're my son." I stopped. "You are still my son. That part doesn't change." The room was very quiet. The furnace clicked and hummed. "But I will not allow Sophie to lose what Margaret and I spent 40 years building," I said. "Not to a line of credit, not to a business expansion, and not to a fabricated medical petition." I picked up my coffee cup. It had gone cold. "Those are the facts as they currently exist. What happens next is up to you." Claire spoke first. Her voice was careful and controlled, and underneath it was something that might have been shame, or the early beginning of it. "We should go," she said quietly. Marcus didn't answer. He was looking at the table. I had known my son for 39 years, and I had never seen his face do exactly what it was doing in that moment. Something was working in him. I didn't know what it was yet, and I understood that I might never know, and that I had to be all right with that. Sophie slid off her chair and came and stood beside me. She had the complete horsebook series tucked under one arm. She took my hand with her free one and leaned against my side the way children do when they're not trying to make a statement but end up making the most powerful one in the room. I put my arm around her. "Hey, Bug," I said. "Hey, Grandpa," she said. Marcus looked at his daughter, and then at me, and I saw something in his face that I recognized because I had felt it myself on those long drives home from Sacramento when the visit had been shorter than I'd wanted, and Sophie had waved from the doorway until I turned this corner. That specific grief of watching something good recede because you made choices that moved you away from it. He stood up from the table. He took the envelope. He walked to the back door and stood there with his hand on the frame, looking out at the yard, at the bare maple tree, and the bird feeder I'd finally refilled 2 days ago, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know how to fix this, Dad." "I know," I said. "I don't even know if you want me to try." "I don't know either," I said. "That's the honest answer." He nodded. He kept looking at the yard. Sophie tugged my hand. "Can we read the horse book?" she whispered. I looked down at her. "Yeah," I said. "We can read the horse book." We spent the afternoon on the couch, Sophie and I, with the first volume open across both our laps. She read the easy parts out loud and I read the harder words, and she corrected my character voices with the confidence of an expert. And outside the window the afternoon light went gray and thin, and eventually disappeared altogether. Marcus and Claire stayed. They did not stay because I asked them to or because anything had been resolved. They stayed because where else do you go on Christmas afternoon? Claire heated up leftovers, and nobody said much. And after dinner, Marcus sat on the living room floor and built a Lego set with Sophie that she'd gotten from a school friend, and I watched them from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in my hands, and thought about Margaret and about load-bearing structures and about the difference between a bridge that holds and a bridge that only looks like it's holding. I didn't know what Marcus would do next. I still don't know. There are conversations ahead of us that I am not looking forward to, and outcomes I can't predict, and the specific ongoing sorrow of having seen your child as they actually are and having to decide what to do with what you saw. But Sophie was on the floor beside her father, clicking Lego pieces together and humming something tuneless and satisfied, and the horse book was on the end table with a bookmark in chapter 4, and the bird feeder outside was full, and those things were true in a way that nothing could restructure or petition away from me. That's the thing about building things that are meant to last. You don't do it assuming nothing will ever go wrong. You do it knowing that things will go wrong, designing it from the beginning with that knowledge, making sure that when the load shifts, or the ground moves, or the inspection finds a crack you didn't expect, the whole structure doesn't come down. You build in the redundancy. You do the unglamorous work. You hold still and you assess and you make sure the things that matter are protected before anything else. Margaret used to say that's what love is too, when you do it right. Not the feeling, the engineering. I turned off the kitchen light and went and sat with my family. If this story meant something to you, I'd ask you to share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have ever done something like that, driven through the storm, flown across the country, ridden the bus for 11 hours just to sit at the same table as someone you love, leave that in the comments. I read every one.